Why would the Mahabharata place its most famous teaching before the first arrow is even released? The armies are ready. Conch shells have sounded. Kurukshetra is seconds from becoming a storm of iron, dust, and death. Yet at the exact edge of combat, everything stops. Arjuna lowers his will before he lowers his bow, and the war must wait for a conversation that will decide whether battle becomes duty, collapse, or something far more difficult. That pause is not a decorative delay. It is the point. The epic wants us to feel the unbearable pressure of action waiting for permission from conscience. One side cannot advance because one warrior's inner balance has shattered. That means the first battlefield of the Gita is not made of soil, wheels, and weapons. It is made of hesitation, memory, duty, and the terrifying possibility that the right action may still feel emotionally unbearable. And what does Arjuna see when he asks Krishna to place the chariot between the armies? He does not see faceless enemies. He sees Bhishma, the grandfather who shaped his world. He sees Drona, the teacher who trained his hands and mind. He sees cousins, kin, and history itself standing inside the opposing line. Suddenly battle is no longer strategy alone. It becomes an act that seems ready to cut through the very relationships that once gave life meaning. This is why the question escalates so fast. If Arjuna had only feared death, the moment would be ordinary by epic standards. But he fears becoming the instrument of a victory that may destroy the moral meaning of winning. What use is a kingdom purchased through the death of those one is supposed to honor? The Gita begins here because the Mahabharata refuses to let action look simple when its consequences can poison the soul of the actor. So the first hook of the Gita is sharper than many people notice. The teaching does not arrive after violence to explain it later. It arrives before violence to test whether violence can be entered without self-deception. Krishna is not filling empty time. He is intervening at the last possible second before Arjuna's confusion turns either into paralysis or into action without clarity. Both would be disastrous. The war must wait because the mind has not yet become fit for duty. Arjuna's breakdown matters because it is intelligent. He is not simply frightened. He is reasoning his way into despair. He imagines the destruction of families, the collapse of social order, the corruption of future generations, and the emptiness of power gained through blood. In other words, he is asking the question every civilization eventually faces: when duty demands harsh action, how do you know whether you are protecting order or becoming another force of ruin yourself? Bhishma and Drona intensify that crisis. These are not accidental obstacles. They are figures through whom Arjuna learned loyalty, discipline, and value itself. So when he imagines striking them, his problem becomes existential. Can a hand trained by a teacher justly lift itself against that teacher? Can honor toward elders survive the very duty that seems to require their defeat? The Gita happens before battle because those contradictions have to be faced before action turns them into irreversible fact. When Arjuna says his limbs fail and his bow slips, the epic makes the body speak the language of conscience. His muscles are not betraying him at random. They are revealing that action without inner alignment becomes physically impossible at the decisive edge. This is crucial. The Mahabharata does not celebrate blind readiness. It shows that the finest warrior may still become unusable if he cannot answer why he should act, for whom he acts, and what kind of self will remain afterward. Krishna does not interrupt Arjuna immediately with a slogan. He lets the crisis reveal its full shape. That matters because superficial comfort would fail here. Arjuna does not need distraction. He needs a way to distinguish compassion from confusion, renunciation from escape, and moral sensitivity from moral collapse. The pause before battle grows longer because the issue is bigger than courage. The issue is whether refusal in this moment would actually be noble, or whether it would be another form of abandoned responsibility. That is why Arjuna's collapse is the real beginning of the Gita, not an interruption of it. Without that collapse, the teaching would sound abstract. With it, every line becomes urgent. The battlefield has compressed the human problem into one unbearable instant: act and risk guilt, refuse and risk betrayal of duty. Before the first arrow flies, Krishna has to answer a harder question than military tactics. He has to show how disciplined action can survive grief without becoming cruelty. Krishna's first task is not to make Arjuna aggressive. It is to make him see clearly. The teaching begins before battle because combat is not the immediate enemy. Confusion is. Attachment that distorts judgment is. Fear dressed up as virtue is. Krishna treats the mind itself as terrain that must be understood before action can become clean. If Arjuna enters war while inwardly disordered, then even a justified cause will be carried out by an unstable instrument. So Krishna widens the frame. He begins with the nature of the self because Arjuna is trapped inside the immediate spectacle of death. By shifting attention from the perishable body to a deeper continuity of being, Krishna is not dismissing grief. He is refusing to let grief become the only lens through which duty is judged. The Gita happens before the first arrow because Arjuna first has to stand somewhere larger than panic if he is going to act at all. Then Krishna returns Arjuna to Dharma, but with sharper edges. Duty is not whatever feels emotionally comfortable. Duty is what remains binding when comfort collapses. As a Kshatriya in a war he did not create alone, Arjuna cannot pretend he is standing outside history. The Gita must happen before battle so that Dharma is understood before blood further clouds the issue. Krishna is teaching that refusing one's role can also be a moral act, but only if it is truly renunciation and not disguised avoidance. This is where the famous discipline of action without attachment becomes essential. Krishna does not tell Arjuna to stop caring. He tells him to stop making results the basis of moral stability. If action depends on guaranteed emotional outcomes, duty will collapse whenever consequences look painful. The war waits for this lesson because otherwise Arjuna will fight either for victory, revenge, or despair. Krishna needs him to fight, if he fights at all, from clarity rather than possession by outcomes. Now the pause before the first arrow starts to make deeper sense. The Gita is not stopping war because the epic prefers ideas to reality. It is preparing action so reality is not entered blindly. Krishna knows that once the battle begins, events will move too quickly for foundational correction. Philosophy has to happen before momentum takes over. The mind must be disciplined before the arm is released. Otherwise Kurukshetra becomes just another field of force without wisdom. The Gita does not erase Arjuna's sorrow. It reorganizes it. That distinction is everything. Krishna is not training Arjuna to become emotionally empty. He is training him to stop letting pain dictate the terms of truth. By the time the first arrow can fly, Arjuna has to be a different kind of agent from the one who first collapsed. The same warrior remains, but the center from which he acts must be less possessive, less confused, and more aligned with duty. Notice how extraordinary that makes the structure. Thousands wait because one conscience has become the hinge of history. The epic is teaching that civilizational outcomes do not emerge from force alone. They emerge from the quality of the mind's directing force. That is why the Bhagavad Gita belongs before combat. The first arrow should not be released by a man acting from sentimental collapse or ego fever. It should be released, if at all, only after a deeper alignment is restored. What changes is not the external field. Bhishma is still there. Drona is still there. Death is still there. The tragedy has not disappeared. What changes is Arjuna seeing. He can now hold grief and duty in the same frame without letting grief cancel duty entirely. That is a much harder achievement than simple bravery. The Gita happens before the first arrow because the arrow itself is not the breakthrough. Correct vision is the breakthrough that makes action morally possible. This also explains why the Gita remains powerful beyond war. Most people do not stand between two armies, but many stand between competing loyalties, incomplete knowledge, and painful consequences. We want action to become easy before we commit to it. Krishna offers something harder and more durable, not easy action, but lucid action. The moment before the first arrow becomes universal because it captures the human need to purify motive before stepping into irreversible consequence. Now the episode reaches its real escalation. The first arrow matters precisely because it comes after understanding, not before it. The battlefield has not become less dangerous, but Arjuna has become less divided. That is the function of the Gita's timing. It is not inserted before the war for dramatic decoration. It is placed there so the war can no longer be mistaken for mere violence. It becomes a test of whether action can serve Dharma without becoming captive to despair or ambition. So why does the Gita happen before the first arrow? Because the Mahabharata wants to make one thing impossible to ignore: outer conflict is always shaped by inner condition. Before kingdoms are won or lost, motives are tested. Before weapons strike bodies, confusion strikes judgment. The pause at Kurukshetra is the epic's way of forcing us to see that the deepest victories and failures begin long before visible action starts unfolding in the world. Arjuna does not become great because he never doubts. He becomes great because his doubt is taken seriously enough to be purified rather than ignored. That is a profound civilizational claim. The tradition does not merely praise obedience. It stages inquiry at the edge of history and says that action deserves guidance before it deserves speed. The first arrow waits because haste without understanding can be as dangerous as cowardice dressed in the language of compassion. That is also why the Gita remains alive for modern viewers. It speaks to the moment when we want certainty but only have responsibility. It speaks to the instant before we send the message, make the decision, accept the conflict, or step into the cost of doing what must be done. The Mahabharata puts its greatest conversation before the first arrow because human beings most need wisdom not after consequence, but just before they create it. And once you see the Gita this way, the next questions become even sharper. If Arjuna had to purify his action before battle, what about Drona, the teacher standing on the other side? Was he acting from duty, from loyalty, from pride, or from an attachment he could not master? The pause before the first arrow does not end the Mahabharata's moral inquiry. It opens a wider chain of judgment across everyone on the field. That is why the Bhagavad Gita happens before the first arrow. The Mahabharata wants the first victory to happen inside the mind, where fear, attachment, and confusion either distort action or surrender to clarity. Only then can the outer battle begin with any moral meaning at all. If this episode helped you see the Mahabharata more deeply, like this video, subscribe to EkalavyaLearn, and turn on the bell icon to get new videos on time. Next, Drona's story asks an even sharper question: was he guided by duty, pride, or attachment?